Aloha. Good afternoon, evening, morning. Good to see you all. Hope hope folks are doing well. Mm. Take a moment to look around, see who's here today if you'd like. Michelle is it's her last day in Chiang Mai today, and then she'll slowly make her way back over to Hawaii over the next 4 days or so. So we'll be seeing her next week. I'll give you all a good report. I'll say you're very well behaved in her absence. So she'll be happy. We'll see. You have one more one more hurdle before you really are sure to get the good report card. Mm. All right, let's sit for a little while together. So making your way into a reasonable amount of comfort and stability. Mm. Posture that invites both of these things as much as possible. Of course, during our time, the body will settle in different ways, and some adjustments may be necessary or supportive. And of course, that's fine. Always taking the time to be interested in the motivation, the qualities of mind that are response to physical sensations. What impact those qualities have when they carry into the volitional intention to move, and then the physical sensations associated with the movement. This is really just simply true for our practice in general. This mysterious, profound, subtle, amazing relationship between mind and body, heart and body, the mental, emotional, and material. So much when we really settle in feels uncontrollable in terms of what arises and where and when. Qualities of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. This wildness, this uncontrollability sometimes make us feel like things are inevitable, the outcome. But we also begin to see this incredibly powerful capacity we have in how we respond, how we understand what's arising and passing, how that conditions the response, what responsibility we have to change the conditions, the heart mind, in terms of what we instigate, what we push forward into our lives, into the world. In this flood of experience in the present moment, where uncontrollability becomes responsibility, transforms. Sometimes the charge of that can feel like a burden, possible. Which is why we practice sitting here, receiving sound, receiving physical sensations throughout the body, visual impressions, the eye door, sounds, smells, tastes, touch, the activity of the mind itself. Some streaming in from a great beyond, some being created in this moment intentionally. So much of our practice simply trying to observe and keep up with the phenomena, bringing the attention to the area of the abdomen, or the sensations of breathing can be noticed, shallow or deep, relaxed or constricted, doesn't matter. Noticing tension, straining, resting, relaxing, deflating, arising and passing of the breath, training ground for the understanding of the arising and passing of all phenomena. So the breath is not more mystical or magical or more profound. So if it's a challenging place for any reason to use as a primary object of attention, we can open up to the hands, whether resting on our legs or knees, or one holding the other in our lap. You notice warmth, coolness, pressure, movement, tingling, aching, coming and going, evoking experiences of consciousness of these things, the knowing, and the knowing of the knowing. And we are aware of the mind, its thoughts, its imaginings, its preferences, heart, wanting, not wanting, at ease, sleepy, alert, receiving whatever is arisen, care and kindness. Sometimes the field of the whole body is more appropriate, or outside of the sense of the physical body into the just receiving stream of sound, sensation. Nothing to do with them, nothing to change or manipulate. Noticing different textures, tones, vibration. Same with the body, same with the heart, mind. Not rushing, not trying to get past what's happening. Noticing the arising, the presence, the dissipation, whatever we're observing. Feeling life fully, more and more clarity, less and less entanglement, or at least seeing entanglement with clarity. We find our way. So we have some time again today for questions. If anyone has any about your practice, about the instructions, uh, anything happening in your spiritual life and your path practice that I might be able to support with, be happy to take some time. The best way to let me know is to the bottom of your screen, the Zoom screen. There's a little button that says raise hand. You can click on that if you have a question, or type to me in the chat that you have a question, and I can call on you, or wave your physical hand and get a sense of that as well. Actually, before that, I realized there were a couple announcements I wanted to make. Sorry if anyone was gearing up to press that button. Um, the Just a reminder that in a couple weeks, starting the Friday after Thanksgiving, we have our um, sort of 4 or 5 day long online meditation course, the Dhamma, Pure, Deep, and Simple. It's open to everyone, kind of no matter how much time you can take. You can watch the recordings, you can join for the whole thing, you can, just very flexible in terms of how we hold that one. So just to kind of remind folks that that's happening, and the registration stuff is on the website. And then in January, that goes, I think, till December 2nd. And then in January, uh, we're doing the month-long loving kindness retreat as usual, or as we've been doing the last several years, where the sort of weekends of everyone is welcome to come together, and we kind of go weekend by weekend around the four Brahma Viharas for 4 weekends in a row, and then some folks are able to kind of sit kind of intensive month long during that time. And um, if you're able to do that, and have sat with us and are kind of familiar with our approach, that you're invited to register for that whole program if you'd like. And there's a number. We used to be able to have kind of people just do 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Now that our sort of team is smaller, it's a little hard to hold all of that. But if there is room, coming up to it, uh, then we may be able to include some folks who are for shorter than the full month. So if people have already kind of inquired about that, if you'd like to sort of hold that possibility, let us know. Um, and so that's in January. But otherwise, the weekends are totally unhindered, open for anyone. As many folks can join. It's really been awesome doing that. So we're looking forward to that. And then last, I just wanted to say it's a very kind of early information idea, but I'm going to send out like probably a little questionnaire next week to sort of everyone on the email list about the possibility of having some kind of sort of like mutual aid system for within our Sangha. Basically, just the idea that there may be skills and capacities within this larger Sangha that we have, and needs or requests or things that would be helpful, and that there might be a useful way to sort of match people up with skills if they have time and energy to kind of share those freely with folks who might be in need of certain skills or capacities. So right now, that's not going to be like a financial thing, more like about immigration law and you need a lawyer, or about, I mean, any number of things. I have a kind of list of things I've run down: housing rights, um, whatever, baking bread. I think that would sort of be interesting to see what are the kind of skill sets that people feel like they have and would be open to offering on a kind of one-on-one basis with other folks who are maybe needing support around something. So right now, just mostly just to let you know, the second part is the question of like the some kind of if it's able to happen, what's the kind of platform on which that can be kind of coordinated. So it's going to require like technological something. Um, and I've talked to some of the folks who built our app already to see if what it would be like for them to build like a website that could kind of do some basic functioning around it. But if other folks know of apps or know of websites or sort of know of other ways that people have done this kind of thing in a smaller community, um, very dispersed, of course, around country globe, um, might be helpful to know about that. So that's another thing, right? Like tech support and security and all these things. So if anyone does know of anything, you can send me an email just at information@vipassanahawaii.org. And otherwise, we'll be sending something out soon about that. Now you've also had time to think of questions if you have any. Hi there, Debbie. I think you can unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Great.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So, my sit today was there was a lot going on. But a few weeks ago, I said that I spoke to the group and I said that sometimes my sits like that time were very calm and not much was happening. And you said you thought that was hilarious that I said not much was happening. And Michelle thought it was funny too. And since then, I've just been mulling that over in my mind and like wondering what you meant by that, like why it was funny or why. I mean, I'm not offended or anything, but I'm just curious. Like what like is it do you not conceive of like someone just having a calm sit? Would that not be just sort of equanimity?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm sorry if it didn't feel like we kind of explained before sufficiently, you know. So yes, to the we'll start at the end. Yes, to recognize calm, to recognize equanimity, which are different, but sometimes yes, can both be
Yeah.
there at the same time, um, is really important and legitimate. So that it's not to say that that's not um, possible or good practice, of course, you know. The sort of humor comes from usually when that phrase is used, it feels like nothing's happening.
Mm.
What what it tends to point to is first of all the feeling that more should be happening, right? That whatever's happening is sort of insufficient, that there should be more happening. And usually what that also means is it's like there's a thought that some like more intensity should be happening, more pleasant, more unpleasant, more whatever, just more something. And that the idea that because there isn't more unpleasant or more pleasant or more intensity, usually along those lines, that that is interpreted as nothing is happening is a very classic take on it that you one would hear that a lot in our sort of position, but it is also a misunderstanding because there's never more or less happening, really. It's always the same amount of things are happening. There's just a flood of sensory experience of body and mind. And so there's never really a sense of, there's never really more or less happening. There's always a ton of stuff happening. Or if you look at it in a single moment, there's only one thing happening. And that doesn't really change. What changes is the situation of the mind in terms of its capacity to be there and how it experiences this sort of flood. And then, of course, sometimes there is a sense that the flood itself is more neutral, that it's not very evocative and it's not very intense, it's not very pleasant or it's not very unpleasant, and that neutrality is disregarded because it isn't as triggering of a sense of, you know,
Mm.
vigorousness or vitality or anxiety or whatever it is that we interpret as like this is meaningful,
Yeah.
right? And so that is the sort of humorous part on our side, is because because it's it's like a classic thing for people to say, which is a good sign, right? I mean, it's like you're doing it because you're entering this sort of terrain. One way of looking at it is you've come into contact with this sort of terrain that on one hand might be, like you said, calm and equanimous, and there might be something very kind of beautiful and quiet in that. There's other times where it's unfamiliar, and sometimes we don't know how to relate to it. We don't know how to engage it because it feels like there's sort of nothing to kind of hold on to, nothing that's very gripping or isn't grabbing onto us, you know. And so one way to enter that conversation is around just sort of neutral. If it's not pleasant or unpleasant, there's more neutral experience. Do we disregard it? Do we tend not to recognize it? Do we tend not to, the body is still happening, sound is still happening, the mind is still happening. It's all still a momentary flux of situation, of conditions and experiences.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of like the
Yeah.
take on it. How
Yeah.
does that
Yeah.
make sense? Does that sound?
Yeah. Kind of
Mhm.
like it's fun, the fact that um, when quote nothing when is happening, there's really is something happening. Like even if it's what you just said, like just you're I'm sitting here, my the cells in my body are changing, whatever. There's always something happening. And so and yeah, I and so it's just kind of funny to think that nothing's happening, because if nothing were happening, I don't know, maybe I'd be dead or something. I don't know. But yeah, I guess I
Right.
think I
Nothing
think I
can happen,
understand. I
and it's a bigger deal, right? But that's usually a very momentary thing. I think, right. And so then there is a second layer to
right,
it, which is that like
right.
nothing's happening, and that's a problem, right? Like whether
Yeah,
if nothing's happening and you're like, I'm okay, but I want to check in because nothing seems like nothing's
yeah,
happening,
right,
versus
right.
like nothing's happening and like, there's something. I feel like something should be happening. The wanting, it's all it is wanting, or it's not wanting. But
Yeah,
you frame it in terms of, usually just for simplicity's sake, kind of craving. The
right, right.
sense of like insufficiency, right? The sense of like this isn't enough. That is also very important. It's really meaningful to see that, which is like that sense of like, well, that's, first of all, that's happening. Wanting is happening, and we're not recognizing it because it seems like the observing part of things is just outside of the observation. But really, it's got to all be folded into the observation. So you're like, okay, there's wanting is happening actually. And then what
Mm-hmm,
is the nature of that? Oh, it's this idea that some next thing, something that isn't arisen, some future thing is going to provide or should provide something more engaging.
mm-hmm.
And so that sort of dissatisfaction, uh, that you can actually see all, throughout much of our experience, can be clearer in the times you're describing too. If it feels, sometimes it feels just fine and it's no problem, and we can still sort of have this language of like nothing's happening. There's other times where if it has that flavor of like there's a there's an unsettledness in it,
Yeah.
there's a sense of like, oh, something, it's not satisfying, then it's like, oh, okay, well, there's wanting, and that is a really great place to actually learn about wanting and explore it. Not to reject it or deny it or say, oh, there you go, you're wanting again. It's more like, oh, yeah, what is this? Because it's a cool, like it's a cool terrain to look at it from because it's easy to sort of, but it's hard to sometimes see dissatisfaction clearly in the context of something really unpleasant because it's obvious. Of course, we're dissatisfied, you know. Or with the pleasant, sometimes there is this sense of, oh, is there an anxiety that it's going to get lost or that it's dissipating or what have you? It's
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
stable. But you're in like a more beige, that's like, or when that happens, right? There's like that, the dissatisfaction of like the beige room and like, why, what's the problem really, you know? And it's kind of neat to see.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and it's more sort of neutral territory as opposed to pleasant or unpleasant, and I guess we don't talk about that or too much, you know. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, and some of that is, hmm, well, some of it's just the way things are because especially when people, you know, I mean, I don't want to overgeneralize. It happens throughout our practice, but when people are just starting, sometimes the peaks and troughs are more intense, and so you're trying to kind of have people understand the pleasant, unpleasant. That seems more like out of an imperative, you know. But it is something that after, you know, many years of practice, people often have a hard time for longer periods of time because there's more kind of neutral terrain. You know, maybe things aren't, you know, you have a sense of how you've worked, people have worked with the more evocative stuff, and you have a sense of how to kind of manage some of that, but that you can go through, you know, large deserts in the path that feel that can be bewildering, you know, and that often people will have this sense of like, oh, we want something more exciting to be happening, or has my practice stagnated? You know, am I not progressing? It's very common actually. And people then it's like maybe I should go to Tibetan stuff or you know,
Uh-huh.
there's these
Uh-huh.
ayahuasca people down the street doing their
Hmm.
thing. Like
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
just need something more, you know, exciting. And so, not to say you shouldn't, you know, go with whom is appropriate, but you don't want
Yeah.
to lose the opportunity to do exactly what you're describing, which is like, here is this chance to see actually how neutral is hard. That 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 there's a weird way in which neutral may be the hardest because
Hmm.
even the unpleasant tends to evoke a sense of self, a sense of solidity, and that can feel stabilizing. In fact, many of us learn that that is like how we create a sense of stability is through aversion, right? And through
Hmm.
or fear,
Yeah.
anxiety, or any flavor of it. And yet the neutral, it's not as easy to, it's not as, its tendency is not to evoke such a strong sense of self. And so this sense of wandering and kind of confusion and uncertainty, it's so important, you know, to go through those terrains and to say, oh, okay, this is just wanting. I mean, that's what it comes down to in the end. It's all just wanting something else to be
Mhm.
happening. And it's like
Yeah.
that's the meat of it. That's the medicine. That's like the that's it. It's just like, oh, wanting. And if you can make friends with that and sort of understand that and understand why the system is trying to use that mechanism of grasping of self solidification in order to like keep things stable, then it's like, well, you can also this you can work with it and be okay with it, and ultimately it doesn't have that power, and then it can really open up into what you're describing too of like, well, it's just a lot of calm, you know, and a lot of equanimity, and
Yeah.
it and sometimes you're like, wow, it's a funny thing to complain about when we do, but it's but you can see why too, you know, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. For the most part, I really enjoy those sits, which are frequent,
Mm,
that are just, very calm, and it's like to me they're very enjoyable.
that's
So
wonderful.
for the
Well,
most, yeah.
and it's yeah, and then there's that side of it too of like where do you understand and use the that what's called, the wholesome, beautiful feelings, right? That come through practice. And this sense of, well, part of the result of concentration and part of the result of the practice is, meant to be equanimity and more ease and more restfulness, and to not dismiss that,
Hmm.
right? To be like, wow, this really does. If you really let it do its work and like go, and then you have the other side where there's going to often, of course, be a tendency to just relate to it in a less investigative way, right? That we're sort of soothed by
Yeah.
the calming or soothed by it. And it's that it's that dance of like, yes, just there's, we should let ourselves feel good, period. Like there's nothing wrong with feeling good. And, especially when it comes to sort of like Dhamma wise, right? That it's come through the practice. And there's always ultimately that sort of just question and the encouragement to be like, am I with this good feeling? Am I deepening my investigation?
Yeah.
Or am I just sort of on cruise control? Am I just sort of like kind of, and again, sometimes you need to feel that goodness and that relief and like the ease of that. So there's a, it could be a long period of time where you're letting yourself just feel that. And there is this sense of like, okay, is this leading to wisdom? Right? Am I
Yeah.
understanding things more deeply? And so then there is this sense of like, okay, well, what's the breath doing here? What's happening with the body? And even very subtle recollection of the intention to investigate, that kind of, oh yeah,
Yes.
keeps it going deeper. So you're not just
Yeah.
sort of stuck at the level of like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
That's good.
uh,
Yeah.
what are they, when they I can't remember the word I'm thinking of, but anyway, you don't want the what I'm trying to think of. Where they just stick a thing in your brain, it settles you down.
Like electroshock therapy.
Well, no, that can be helpful. I mean, all of these things can be helpful. No, oh my goodness. Michelle uses a joke a lot, and um, anyway, I'll think of the word. But yeah, yeah, you're not just trying to dull yourself or dull your mind, you
Yeah.
know, but there is a sort of softness that comes with that that can be really, really beneficial, like genuinely good. And it's these, it's always a stance of how are we also then using it to go deeper. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing it back up. Yep.
Yeah.
Pedro.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
My situation is a little bit similar. I was sitting today and a lot of neutral, maybe a little bit pleasant, but in general, I've had a lot of neutral and I've been a little um, maybe aversion or maybe I wanted more. And in the past, when I've been sitting, I had prostate cancer and I had a treatment of hormone therapy, and so I have a lot of hot flashes. And usually when I'm sitting, the hot flashes are so intense, so I have to take off my shirt and kind of try to cool off. But today I had a hot flash, and um, I I sat through it and I investigated, and wow, all kinds of vibrations, all kinds of changing of temperature. I really noticed hot. I really noticed kind of fluid. I was sweating, softness, um, and stuff moving through my body. And then that after about 10 or 15 minutes that passed, and I was back to neutral again. And I've been wanting, um, I've been wanting to get deeper concentration to notice my sensations the way it's written about when it's more advanced, where you can really see them becoming very fast. That's desire. Um, so I'm wondering if with all this neutral, whether stuck or whether it's going to naturally evolve the more I do. That's one way of asking that question.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's really great. Um, hmm, yeah. Well, I mean, just to say, I think that, you know, on one level, like who can know what leads to what and prepares us for what? You know, but I will say the basic framework of trying to find a present moment anchor, or a primary object. You are usually using something that's basically neutral as your training place, right? So that's why we offer a range. For some people, or for many people, the breath is at the abdomen is like relatively neutral. Not totally, but it's like not of so evocative that for many people it's an okay place to sort of just train and to the point of like maybe lightly pleasant or boring. It's like on that range. But for some people, the breath is not neutral at all. It's very evocative and difficult ways. And so it's like, well, you go outside of that. You go to the hands, or you go to the body, or you go to sound, because the idea is to find some basic thing of neutral, relatively neutral experience that you can observe over time, and that in that training you develop the capacity to be with more intense experience and more evocative experience. And so in a way what you're describing has a similar flavor to that, right? That you've been in sort of a lot of neutral territory. It doesn't feel maybe particularly deep or particularly intense from your perspective. But on the other hand, comes along this thing that, you know, my sense is you probably generally don't like the hot flashes. You basically feel like they're sort of a problem or an irritant or some essentially now kind of chronic thing that you have to deal with. And rather than, I mean, there might be the sort of wobbling in the beginning, but you chose to just relate to it in this way with this method, right? With this and just experience it. Well, oh, okay, well, what is this really like from the inside? And voila, right? It opens up into this like incredible thing that's when you're really engaged, it's like that thing of like you get outside of like pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. It's fascinating, no matter if it's unpleasant or if it's neutral or pleasant, right? That just like there's so much going on. It's so engrossing that you are able to be really involved in this experience for 15 minutes, or it was a long time, um, to be that kind of concentrated, and so then of course it ends and you're back into some territory that feels more familiar. You've probably also kind of expended a lot of energy in that sort of intensity, and so it's not surprising that your attention is going to be like maybe a little duller, or maybe you'd get sleepy, maybe you know things aren't as evocative. Um, it's maybe not as sort of interesting, or doesn't feel as technically like uh, refined or sophisticated. But it's well, that's natural, right? It's like, well, you just had a very intense experience that required a lot of like intensity, and then okay, you kind of run out of little steam, and so then you sort of coast for a little while back in the more neutral territory. And so I 100% think that this is how it develops, and that it can be, and I know how it can be hard to kind of have faith in that process, right? Of you're in a sort of a lot of territory that's either neutral or just feels very familiar. It's the same loops. Um, and yet, if you even look at what you just described, your willingness to do that, you're practicing in this sort of maybe less interesting terrain, I would say, is what allowed you to and gave you the skill set to be able to show up for this other thing in a much more powerful way than you might normally, right? And that in itself feels like it could be a lot of kind of vindication, right? And kind of positive reinforcement of like, oh, what you're doing is leading something. It's very hard to measure our own practice. You because there's so many, it's like a labyrinth. There's so many twists and turns that seem to be moving away or sometimes closer to where you think you're going. But those signals are not always clear, not always trustworthy. So I just feel like it's such a good example of how it can work, and how ultimately, I mean, there's a way in which it's like very fortunate that you can feel like you're sitting most of the time with relatively mundane feeling sort of experience. It's not the case all the time. Certainly, not for everyone. And so it's it can you don't feel like you're under threat all the time, from everything, which can be the case. I mean, those types of things can happen for a long time, and you have to be very sort of like, careful and sort of delicate and tender with your practice in those periods. So that you're in a period where it doesn't feel especially rigorous or something. I I'm so unconcerned about that, given what you've described and what you're doing. It's like this is what works, and it's the question of what to read about and how any of us would like our practice to feel, and what you read in the text. I mean, that is it's a it's a very it's a long-term thing to negotiate. Where is that inspiring, and where does that feel like, oh, this is possible, and where does it feel kind of humiliating because we feel so far from that? Um, I think mostly what I'd say is like for, you know, most of us, most of our practice lives, things really come together with that level of clarity, very it's very special when that happens. It's not like it happens all the time, or that there's always this level of just like intense concentration and momentary awareness. That a lot of the practice is this being willing to have it be vague and unclear and muddled and hang out in that and hang out in that and hang out in that and observe it and try. And that there's times where something shifts and it sort of things snap into focus, usually much shorter than 15 minutes that it happens for. And then it kind of falls apart, and you just see that that's a lot of the path is this. um, Again, it's like part of that purification motivation that was talked about last week, where it's like you're just it takes a lot of work for those conditions to happen, and you have to put in a lot of work, but you also can't force it, you can't rush it, you can't make it happen faster. It's just a lot of times sitting with the factors of mind that are very imperfect for a long time, and understanding them and understanding what are the conditions that cause them to kind of come together or dissipate, um, but that they only need to come together for a short period of time for very profound insight to happen. And so that's the other thing to remember. It's like, when you start talking about like the progress of insight and the kind of like technical uh, moments that start to really dig, like dig that, uh, get the traction going with the the awakening experience. Those those are just a moment. right? It isn't like you have to spend a day or a week or something in this sort of like whoa, 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 really, it's like things really just need to come together for a little while and for a very brief sort of like moment of understanding something, and that even subtle understanding of something, not always pleasant, is can have very transformative. It's not just can have very transformative impact. It's like that is the nature of how transformation happens in this context, and so it's in moments, and that the things only need to come together for moments. So the chart can be, kind of complicated and overwhelming. But I also don't, it's like, it's good to have ambition. It's good to have like the desire for freedom is considered healthy. It's considered wholesome. And you have to be careful with if you're too attached, you're too fixated on something outside of what's right in front. But that's not just the thing that's happening right now, right? Some future experience or some future version of ourselves that we hope will be more enlightened or whatever, or more concentrated or whatever. You do have to be careful about that, right? And really like, well, okay, you get it. You get that there's the healthy motivation in there, but ultimately the work is always going to be about what's happening right now. How are we relating to and trying to observe what's happening right now? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that perspective. I appreciate it. It's helpful. I I remind myself all the time that the goal is the practice, and the practice is the goal.
Mm,
That as long as I remember that, I'm fine.
that's great. Yeah, 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 yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Pedro. Yeah, and Debbie, I realized lobotomy. That was the word I was trying to think of. Where it's like, we're not like aiming for a lobotomy. That's not like the goal, right? Just sort of like dullness of everything. It's one of the weird paradoxes of equanimity, which is that things are very vibrant and very dynamic, and yet very quiet and very peaceful. And calm can have more of a lobotomizing quality to it, and that's okay. It's not like we're trying to avoid that either. um, but I think it's like anyone would sort of understand, right? It's like, oh, we're not just trying to like turn everything neutral, but sometimes things present very intensely, and so there is nothing wrong with that. But where do we also always try to kind of keep in mind that life is actually always moving, and there's always things coming and going, and yeah, keeping that aliveness to it, and attentive to that aliveness is an important fundamental part of it. Yeah. I think Patricia, you had your hand raised right first, and then Catherine. Yeah.
There it goes. Thanks. Um, I had a question about intention. I was just at a retreat fairly close to you over between Hawaii and Kapa'au at the Island Retreat Center uh, with an old teacher of mine, John Travis. And I found it was very powerful, a lot because of the area. I mean, the nature was so thick in a way that I think that it helped the practice, I really do. And we talked a lot about intention and the power of it. And I just kind of wanted to get your take on that because I could kind of feel that that was a help somehow. Not just my intention, but everybody's intention, and maybe everybody's intention who'd ever been to that place before.
Mm,
Yeah.
well, it's very beautiful. Mm, mm. If for folks who don't know, for anyone who had been to the land that we had at Vipassana Hawaii up north, it's very close to where they held this retreat, so you'll have a sense of And finally it started raining, so you had some. It wasn't just like parched, dry, terrible, terribleness. You know, well, the ones I'd say is there are places that just have a vibe. I mean, you encounter that anywhere, and everywhere is sacred, right? There's nowhere that's not sacred, and sometimes a place just has something.
Mhm.
And I've been told that, in the kind of general tradition here in Hawaii, that was considered as something that was at a place had a quality to it. A place had a vibe. A place had and that is where you would then choose to put a heiau, a temple, to. So there was a sense on one hand, and I think both of these sides are true. Sometimes there's a places are quiet, places have something, for who knows why. And maybe it's human related, maybe it's just in the spirit world, maybe it's something beyond those things. And so then people are sensitive to that and find refuge there and create something there, to kind of take advantage of that, like you'd you know dig a well by a spring, that it's like a different kind of something like that. And so I think that's one thing that can happen. And then there's another thing that can happen where, like it's a few places I've been to in Burma where you go into a cave, which was not necessarily a natural formation. It was something that was carved into the mountain, and it's a place where someone got enlightened. And it's like super quiet. Because there's other caves that aren't. They're like they're cool, they're neat, they're interesting. And there's some places you go in and it's like, to me, I've always felt like it feels like it's like the opposite of a nuclear bomb. You know, you're like, whoa, something else really something really happened here, and you don't want to leave. You're like, I'll just hang out. I'll get that lobotomy. I'll just kind of like uh, zone into that. So that I think is the extreme side of that. And then I think there's the side of like, yeah, people practice together in a place, one tradition or another. Even the Sagaing Hills where we go or used to go, it's much older than Buddhism. It was used as a sacred place. So yeah, what's the eons of that? So intention and realization and just sila and carefulness, and non-harming. And it's I would say it's all sides of karma. It's not just the
Mhm.
intention, it's the action and the realization, right? So karma has a built-in kind of understanding. Those are all the same. They're all part of the same thing. um, you can separate them, but karma, right, we understand it all as intention, we understand it as action, but we also understand it as the results. And so that that it has a wake, that it has impact in ways that are uh, less physically tangible or very subtly tangible. Yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure, for sure. And how fortunate we are when we get to like abide in a place like that and practice with other people. And you know
Yeah, I hadn't experienced that was so quiet and wild. And you're right, they hadn't rained at all, and they were having to uh, water some of the trees by hand so they wouldn't die. They were so wanting to preserve that place.
uh,
But it was the only thing we heard at night were cows making mating calls or whatever. But it was very special.
no, that's really wonderful. Yeah. No, I mean, there is there is you can get awakened, enlightened in prison, right?
Mm.
For sure, 100%. Or in a cave somewhere, right? So it's not to say, the question of conditions is very interesting, and you know, there's not just like one answer, but it's important to know that like you can do it anywhere. And then there is something about I think a lot of Dhamma centers in the West are like constructed with a certain kind of ease and protection in mind. And there's something very good about that. Something like just a baseline, like it's thoughtful, it's careful, it's considered, and uh, it's what for some people, many people feel is like kind of protective and quiet. And there's something that can be lost in that in terms of enough interaction with something a little more wild, something a little more like nature. Um, and it's something I always appreciated about practicing out there in Kohala. It's something I always appreciated about the Zendo on Oahu, in Palolo, that we would have many years of kind of retreats and shorter retreats and long retreats. It was very protection from the elements, and some of that's very romantic, like the cows or the roosters or pigs or whatever, all these wild animals. It's not just easy, it's not just pleasant, but there is something about that I think can be very. It's related to this question of is our equanimity coming from a sort of dynamism of life and the wilderness and the wildness outside, versus inside, um, outside and inside, or versus something kind of more protected. And it's not like one or the other is right or wrong, or the spectrum, or anywhere on the spectrum is right or wrong. But I will say that I really do resonate with the value of those places and those experiences. It's I would go to Vallecitos in New Mexico or Hollyhock up, in British Columbia. This understanding that it's like, oh, for people to get out into the wild and also the beautiful is not so bad.
Right.
It's like that has its upsides and
Like
it can have its downsides. And maybe I'll end with that. Is like
like the
at
centipedes.
Vallecitos, yeah, the centipedes, right? It's like we would have to sort of warn. There's always a little bit of something at some place of like you have to like the beauty and the magic of wilderness and wild animals and space, and nature and being away from so much human
Yeah.
activity is a gift and a blessing, and it's like to use that. But it can be enthralling in a way where you stop paying attention to your body, you stop paying attention to your breath, right? One stops kind of dropping in, and so it's part of what's great about going in terms of a sangha and with a teacher. And there's that always that sort of reminder to fold it back into: are we using this beauty? Are we using the goodness? Or using the dynamic to deepen, right? And to keep observing and not get just sort of stuck in enchantment, you know.
I think for me, it was this true nature and nature are so connected. It could see it and experience it a little bit there more than any of these other type centers that I've been going to most of my life.
Mm-hmm.
There's who we really are, and there it is. So thank you.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. I'm really, really glad that they held that retreat up there. Very, very moving.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I guess for folks who don't know, John has been, I don't think it's going to happen now, but there was a few years where he um, took over the Thai Lake retreat after Steve, had to kind of let it go and wasn't able to do it. So John Travis sort of really took responsibility with him and some students for a few years to kind of keep that going. I think there's, kind of ongoing questions about the place, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, no, he's been a friend to the organization. It's great to have him. Yeah, I'd be teaching over here too. Kathleen.
Hi. Um, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about practicing with memories. Um, when I'm on retreat, I can see as part of the flow of experience, just real quickly, images and thoughts, and sometimes there's some emotion in there. And again, memory is a concept, but I can see that that's what it is, that the mind is just picking up bits and pieces from the past and making it into something. Um, and that's on retreat. I don't have that level of concentration in my regular practice, but I can sometimes see that, oh, that's what my mind is doing, right? It's just creating this sense of solidity by bringing in these images and thoughts. Um, And I guess I'm just wondering if you have any wisdom about how to practice with it. In particular, um, I've had a lot of chronic pain and I've had some stuff come back that hasn't been around for a while. And it's just been really challenging to practice with it. And I was thinking that, it, the mind goes to, oh, am I going back to where I was? Right. Any words of wisdom about how to practice with that kind of thing would be great. Thank you.
In some ways, I guess I feel that memory, or what we call memory, and I think you're pointing to, it's maybe perhaps not something where the edges are totally clear and defined, right? But that there's a way in which we simply relate to it as thought, right? I mean, there's times where it's important to recognize the way in which we might be inappropriately bringing a past moment of experience, uh, relating to it as if it's a present moment experience, right? Uh, in a way that's not helpful, um, in terms of Vipassana, or in terms of our own psychology, or just what's it kind of feels healthy, in the moment. There's a way, of course, that is, something hard that we all face, is that tendency to do precisely that. And that we can feel like we're sort of reliving emotionally a past experience, that as if it's happening now, but that it's, actually something from the past. And so there's a whole realm of like PTSD and kind of, carefulness around that tendency, which, depending on sort of like, right, like how extreme it is that we're talking, there's like a whole range of tools that are not strictly or merely in the context of Vipassana, So I want to sort of just like make maybe a little bit of like that sort of distinction at this point, that like there's levels of the conversation that have to do with things like far beyond the not far beyond, but just um, to be careful and clear about what's in the scope of like kind of Vipassana, and what's the range of things that require and are benefit a sort of support of other tools and other systems, right? And other techniques. So in terms of just Vipassana and just that sort of like something very a maybe less evocative version of that tendency, to just really relate to them as thoughts as you would any, and to as we would any, the idea is like, well, what's happening around it, right? What are the concomitant or the co-arising factors of mind around emotion, around self-belief, um, the questions sometimes of like, why is this thought or this memory arising now? um, to some degree, to what role do I have responsibility in for having brought something to mind? You know, there's a whole bunch of um, just because something is a memory doesn't mean that it's not legitimate. Because I think there can be that way of relating to Vipassana where it's like, it's a memory, it's old, forget it. You're just not, it's not what's happening now. And yet, of course, the thought is happening now. And there are plenty of techniques, whether it's in the Brahma Viharas or even in more of the mindfulness practice, where recollection is part of the practice, right? Recollecting. I mean, even that's what sati means ultimately. But the word we talk as mindfulness, sati, just really means recollecting. So there's an aspect of remembrance, and whether that means like in the present moment, kind of like putting together, remembering, or certainly at times where the Buddha talked about, well, you know, his own insight into realizing he was striving too hard came from a memory he had as a little boy, sitting in the shade of the rose apple tree, quiet, watching his dad work, watching his dad's workers work, and getting really quiet to the point of absorptive concentration. You know, I always love that. It's like I get relaxed watching other people work too. It's like I'm just sit under my rose apple tree and watch the adults work. But that was like, oh, he realized that he had an experience in the past that was important information of how he might think of practicing. And that memory changed his whole way of relating to his practice. He's up, he calmed down, he's striving so hard, stopped pushing, and he started trying to observe rather than kind of use concentration, push through what's happening is one way of interpreting it. So that's like thin. That's a small thing. And that it's told in the context of a memory is very important. You know, there's the recollections of the virtues of the Buddha. There's all kinds of things, whether they're in the realm of memory that we actually remember, or that we've learned things, that we bring to the present moment because we've learned them in the past. That's it's all about the intention, and it's all about the motivating forces and the intentional kind of motivating forces and the concomitant mental factors that are being brought up with it. So it's like, oh, is it wholesome? Is it leading towards release? Is it leading towards strengthening the mind and deepening our capacity? So there's those things of like, if it is, then we consider that. If it's not, then there's to be skeptical of, right? It's like, oh, well, maybe I should be careful about this. Maybe I okay, this happened, this memory happened, or this thought process happened, but I actually don't want to perpetuate it. I don't want to pursue it because it's not actually leading to where I want to go. Or sometimes it just takes a few rehearsals of it before we can sort of be like, okay, what is the flavor? What something I'm not seeing. Because I'm not seeing something about it, it keeps perpetuating. And so it's like, oh, there's an emotion, there's a grief, there's a wanting, there's a something, and that sometimes it takes some cycles, few 100,000, right, before we like are like, oh, maybe there's something going on here that I can kind of pay attention to. And even that is not like a repressive action, right? That's like, there's information here that's not totally being digested, and so it's like, what is sort of going on there? So, very, and it's only the more insistent, persistent times where it's like, oh, you actually need to kind of like say stop and put a boundary up and put a wall up, change the channel, really focus on something else, really, stop sitting or whatever it is, where it's like something just feels like it's, um, yeah, just digging you into a hole, you know, and that's something we all sort of, find our way around, or things come up at different times, so then I guess I'll just say lastly that so much of it isn't personal, and kind of what you said about like the it's a mechanism. Like I, there's there's like a tendency I started to see, like, of and the content changes over years, and that's how it's sort of like that's why you have to keep sort of dynamic, but there'll be like often towards the beginning of a retreat, like just some days where just embarrassing things that I remember, right? Where it's like, oh, I wish I hadn't said that, or like light, not like intense, like, oh my God, I really did a horrible thing. Just like dumb things, but things from like like childhood, like really things where you're like, oh, there's still like embarrassment about something silly. Not to dismiss it, but to just sort of point to like they're not true, like uh um like sila things. It's like, oh, it's just things that are shame. and and it's like, wow, there's an interesting sense of like the mind is in some ways trying to protect itself from getting quieter, and in order to do that, it's bringing up things that one is identified with. It's like easy pickings, things you're just still embarrassed about. And it's like, you sometimes you have to have a little humor with that, right, of being like, wow, because you get that it's really not personal, in a sense, that it's a mechanism that the mind is like not really wanting to explore. It's not wanting to go into unknown territory. It's wanting to sort of stay in the familiar version of ourselves, and that might be really inflated, how great version we are, or at times the mind's going to be like, oh no, here's the negative version. Um, Whatever it is, there's sort of just mechanical at times, and that's important to notice, and not take it personally, not worry about it, because it's like, oh, this is just the mind. That is always an important thing. It's like, oh, is the mind trying? Why is there a wanting to solidify this me right now, even in a negative way? And is it the sense of actually you might be getting quieter, and that this is a way that the mind sort of like, ooh, pops back up into like what feels more normal? And it's like, okay, okay. And then you have to sort of respect that actually a little bit, and not chastise it, not try to push through it. It's like, oh, okay, 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 you're not quite ready. Okay, well, we can hang out and sort of train for a little bit, but then you go back into something a little less familiar. You pop out, you go back in, and that's a lot of the practice until you're, sort of like going into more quiet train, and then, I mean, it still is this process, and then you stop worrying about it, because that's how the mind, that's how the mind trusts you to not push it beyond what it feels safe. Because no self, it's like, no, whoa, right? No, 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 no. Right? Like your mind doesn't want that. It's like, that's bad. that is like death. Someone's right. That's like the only way to interpret that is death. And it's like, we definitely don't want that. So you have to be like, I'm not trying to hurt you, mind. We're not trying to, get rid of this. We're not trying, we're just, and in fact, that's how partly how you start to realize, oh, actually, I am trying to get rid of this. Actually, I am trying to explode this. I really don't want to deal with any of this. And so there is a part of that where we start to see it is a purifying process where you're like, oh, if the system is going to trust you, then you have to not force it. And that really means this weird thing, kind of I was saying earlier. It's like total dedication and total patience because you can't force it. The mind's how it feels, if it feels safe enough to kind of explore and to get beyond the conceptual or get beyond the sort of structures. You totally 100% cannot force it. And the more you try to override the system's sort of defenses, the more it's going to lash back out at you. And you'll have plenty of shameful memories or whatever, jumping back to to claw you back in. I don't, does that feel helpful? Does that feel like it tends to some of it, Kath?
Yeah, I mean, it's just so helpful to hang out with it enough to sort of see a little bit more about what's there. And is this something that I could actually investigate or just allow to be here? Or, when does it get to a point where in order for my system to trust me, I actually need to get up and do something different,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's not personal, one or the other. It's just how much of the factors are present in that moment that will allow me to either investigate or let it be there or I have to get out. Thank you.
It's, yeah. I mean, it's like Michelle says, when it's foolproof, it is, we will do everything we can to try to quick speed it up or push through and you just can't, this, that, I have these seeds growing right now. I cannot believe how long they're taking to come up. It's like, you, people give you some, oh, try this, try that plant, and it's like whatever. There's some like norm. I have a sense of what's a normal time frame for things to sprout. And these things are so slow. And four of them have grown. 10 of them are just there's nothing happening as far as I can tell. And then just today, I'm like, oh no, there is. Like it's still. This is months of watering, months of sitting there, and even the ones that have sprouted within those months, it's just like tiny. They're so delicate. They're so fragile, and it's like, wow, this is on a totally different time frame than any other thing I'm used to, and it's like, where's the faith to just keep watering, keep leaving it out there, not too much sun, not too much shade, and just caring for them and being interested and being and exploring. And so it's like we set all the conditions we can, and then we're just not in control of the actual process that unfolds. And that's, I mean, that's partly, of course, why it's like so hard. Ha ha ha. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Very helpful.
Ooh. All right. Thank you, everyone. Hmm. Yay. Wonderful to be with you again. And I hope you have okay weeks. Careful, gentle, and yeah, I'll look forward to seeing you next Sunday. Aloha.
Thanks, Jesse.